Every night, the maid watched over the Insomniac CEO until she saw her name on his files. Comment yes if you want to know what really happened inside Hale Manor. Now, let us return to the main character. The ocean wind pressed softly against the glass walls of the Hale estate, a lonely mansion perched on the cliffs of Massachusetts Bay. Midnight had passed, and the house was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. In the living room, a single lamp cast a pool of amber light over a man sitting by the window. His name was Adrian Hale. Once the face of innovation and power, now he was simply a man who had not slept through a single night in almost a year. Across the room, Lila Monroe moved quietly. Every motion was deliberate, practiced, and almost ritualistic. She set a small ceramic mug on the tray, steam rising from the chamomile tea she brewed at exactly the same time each night. The mug had a thin crack along its side, sealed with a faint gold line that caught the light. It was not perfect, but it was the only cup he would use. "Tea is ready, Mr. Hale," she said softly, her voice careful not to disturb the fragile calm of the room. Adrian did not answer. His eyes were fixed on the reflection of the sea in the window, where dark waves crashed below the cliffs. He looked like a man trapped between worlds, body here, mind somewhere far away. Lila stood a few feet behind him, hands folded in front of her apron, waiting. When the silence stretched too long, she took a quiet breath and began to read from a worn travel book that once belonged to his late wife. Her tone was even and steady. "The river runs slow tonight," she read, "but every bend carries the memory of where it has been." The words filled the room like warm air. Adrian's breathing, once shallow and uneven, began to slow. His shoulders eased. The faint green light on his smartwatch flickered, showing his pulse returning to normal. Lila wrote the reading time in her small brown notebook labeled House Log. She always recorded his sleep patterns, the time he took his medication, and how long he stayed calm before another wave of restlessness came. To her, this was not just employment. It was a duty she had promised herself to honor. Her mother's voice still echoed in her memory. "Work with dignity, Lila. Never cross the line." Numdare. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping gently against the windows. The sound blended with the low hum of the air conditioner, forming a rhythm almost like breathing. Lila adjusted the thermostat, dimmed the lights one level lower, and whispered, 478, guiding him through the breathing pattern she had taught him weeks ago. He followed, eyes still open, gaze fixed on the dark horizon. 4 seconds inhale, 7 seconds hold, 8 seconds exhale. By the third cycle, his eyelids grew heavy. His hand, once trembling, rested still on the arm of the chair. Lila watched him for another minute, ensuring the pattern stayed even. Then she turned toward the kitchen, her steps light against the marble floor. Every sound in this house felt louder than it should, as if the walls themselves were listening. She washed the teacup carefully, ran a cloth along the rim, and placed it on the counter to dry. Before she left the kitchen, she checked the security monitor above the sink. For a moment, the backyard camera flickered, then went black. A small error message blinked on the screen, signal lost. She frowned. It was not the first time. Lila reached for her notebook and wrote 3 words, "Camera lost again." She underlined the note twice. Back in the living room, Adrian's steady breathing confirmed he had fallen asleep. She pulled the blanket over his shoulders, the same navy cardigan folded neatly beside him, and whispered, "Good night, Mr. Hale." Then she turned off the lamp, leaving the house in soft darkness, unaware that somewhere inside the system she had just checked, a new folder was being created, one with her name on it. Before we continue, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us continue the story. The morning light crept across the wide glass windows of Hale Manor, touching every surface with a soft silver glow. The house was still, its silence broken only by the faint hiss of the espresso machine that Lila had learned to use a week earlier. She moved carefully, her apron neatly tied, her notebook resting open beside the coffee tray. Each page was filled with her handwriting times, temperatures, pulse notes, brief comments on Adrian's sleep. Adrian entered the room quietly. His expression was drawn, the dark circles beneath his eyes lighter than before but still visible. He wore a pressed gray sweater, sleeves rolled up, a gesture that looked more like habit than comfort. "You slept almost 5 hours," Lila said as she handed him the mug. That is the longest stretch since I started here. He nodded once, taking the cup but not drinking. 5 hours, he repeated, as if testing the weight of the number. It felt longer, peaceful even. That is progress, she said. For a moment, the air between them felt lighter. He gave her the faintest of smiles, something rare, almost fragile. When Mrs. Crowell appeared at the doorway, the brief calm broke. The older woman's tone was firm, professional. Mr. Hale, you have visitors from the foundation board at noon. They want clarification regarding your financial statement. Adrian's jaw tightened. Tell them to send it through Victor. I am not ready to meet anyone yet. Mrs. Crowell gave a polite nod, but her eyes flicked toward Lila with quiet warning. The same message she had repeated since the first week. Stay in your place. Do not get too close. After the housekeeper left, Lila returned to cleaning the side table. Adrian watched her for a moment before asking, "Do you ever get tired of this routine?" She looked up, surprised. Tired? No. Repetition can be a kind of peace. He studied her face, the calm steadiness that never seemed to break. You really believe that? I have to, she said. It is how I survive. Maid. He did not reply, but his eyes lingered on her a little longer than before. That evening, the rain returned thin at first, then heavy, sweeping across the windows in silver sheets. The storm matched the unease that had begun to grow in the house. Adrian's phone buzzed constantly with messages from Victor, but he ignored them. Lila could see his hands trembling again, the way they had during his worst nights. Breathe with me, she said quietly, setting the tea on the table. He obeyed, following her rhythm. Inhale 4, hold 7, exhale 8. After a few cycles, his shoulders relaxed, but his voice came out low, uncertain. You remind me of someone I used to know. She used to say the same thing when I could not stop thinking. Was it your wife? Lila asked, before she could stop herself. Adrian's gaze drifted to the window. Yes. She believed silence could heal everything. The sound of thunder filled the pause that followed. Lila lowered her eyes. Maybe she was right. Sometimes silence says more than words. He looked at her again, his expression unreadable. You are not like anyone who has worked here before. She gave a small smile. I am not sure if that is good or bad. Maybe both, he said softly. Later that night, as she made her final round, Lila noticed a shadow moving at the far end of the hallway near the security room. When she approached, the door closed quietly before she could see who was inside. She waited, listening. No sound, only the hum of the generator and the storm outside. Her instincts whispered something was off. She opened her notebook and wrote, Hallway lights flickered at 11:57 p.m. Someone in security room. She underlined the note twice, just as she had done before. Downstairs, the security monitors blinked again. One camera in the backyard turned to static, then black. A small error message flashed. Signal lost. For the second night in a row, Lila stood in the hallway, heart steady but mind alert. Something was happening inside Hale Manor, something she could not yet name, but she would not ignore it. She closed her notebook, exhaled slowly, and whispered to herself, 478. Then she turned off the lights and walked back toward the silent room where Adrian slept, unaware of how close the danger had already come. The next morning began with the sound of a seagull crying above the gray horizon. The storm had passed, but the air around Hale Manor still carried the scent of salt and rain. The sea below the cliffs was restless, its waves folding over one another like slow breathing. Lila entered the living room with her notebook pressed to her chest. Adrian was standing near the fireplace, the glow of the flames painting a faint warmth across his face. He looked different today, rested, but uneasy. His phone lay on the table beside him, screen glowing with unread messages. Good morning, she said softly. He turned toward her. Victor has been calling since dawn. He says the foundation board wants my final approval on a property sale. I do not even remember signing anything. Lila hesitated. Maybe you should look at the paperwork first. I did, he said. It bears my signature, but I do not remember writing it. The words hung in the air like the echo of a secret. She placed the tea on the table and watched him pace across the rug. His movements were sharp, restless. I think someone wants to sell off part of the foundation. The children's therapy program, the only one my wife built, he said, his voice low. If that happens, everything she cared for disappears. Lila remembered the flickering cameras, the shadows in the hallway, the folder deliveries at midnight. Her heart began to pound. Mr. Hale, she said, may I check something for you? The security log keeps showing blackouts during my shift. Jupl. Adrian stopped pacing. You noticed that? Yes, sir, she replied. The backyard camera went out 2 nights in a row, and someone was in the security room just before it happened. He looked at her with a mix of surprise and respect. You are more observant than most people I have worked with. I write down everything, she admitted, tapping the cover of her notebook. It helps me make sense of things. He nodded slowly. Then keep doing that. Every detail might matter. Come do. That evening, as the house settled into its quiet rhythm, Lila followed her usual pattern: tea, reading, breathing. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind was working, connecting fragments that did not yet form a full picture. At 10:30, while Adrian sat near the window, she carried the laundry basket upstairs. Passing the study, she noticed the door slightly open, the soft light from the desk spilling into the hallway. Curiosity tugged at her. She stepped closer and saw the computer screen still glowing. She hesitated, then took a step inside. The folder open on the screen bore a label that stopped her breath. Internal risk, divided by staff Lila Monroe. She blinked, thinking her eyes were playing tricks on her, but it was there, in black letters. Her name. Her hands trembled as she reached for the mouse. Inside the folder were scanned images of her signature, her nightly schedules, and several photographs taken from the hallway cameras. And there, attached to a document titled Authorization Hale Foundation Sale, was her forged signature on the bottom line. Lila's throat tightened. Someone had used her name to approve the sale. She heard footsteps approaching and quickly stepped back. Adrian entered the study, startled to find her there. Lila? His tone was calm but sharp with confusion. What are you doing? Her voice faltered. I was checking on the lights. I saw something on the screen. It has my name on it. Lady. He frowned and looked at the monitor. The folder was still open. His eyes scanned the files, and his face drained of color. This should not exist. Someone is trying to use me, she said, to make it look like I signed the order. Adrian rubbed his temples, his breathing unsteady. Victor has access to my system. He handles all digital records. But why would he? A faint sound interrupted him, the distant click of a door closing at the end of the hall. Both of them froze. Adrian stepped toward the corridor, but the sound was already gone. Lila's pulse raced as the glow of the monitor dimmed and the folder vanished, replaced by a blank desktop. Someone had remotely accessed the system and deleted everything. Adrian stared at the screen in disbelief. Whoever it is, they are one step ahead. Lila's voice was barely a whisper. Then we need to move faster. Balt. He looked at her, and for the first time there was no distance in his eyes, only trust and fear bound together. You are right. But if they framed you once, they can do it again. Lila closed her notebook tightly. Then I will make sure they cannot. I have been recording everything since the first night. Outside, thunder rumbled again, faint but deep, like the promise of another storm forming over the sea. Inside Hale Manor, the air turned heavy with the weight of what they had just discovered: their names, their trust, and perhaps their fates, written in the wrong hands. The rain returned that night, harder than before, carried by the wind that swept through the Massachusetts coastline. Hale Manor stood against the storm like a stone monument, its windows flashing with the reflection of lightning. Inside, every creak of the old house sounded alive, as if the walls themselves were aware that something was wrong. Lila could not rest. The image of her forged signature haunted her every time she closed her eyes. She sat in the staff quarters with her notebook open, tracing the words she had written. Internal risk, divided by staff, Lila Monroe. Every page she turned contained careful notes, times, deliveries, even the flickering of the cameras. She did not realize until now that her habit of observation had become her protection. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the corridor. Slow, heavy, she froze. A shadow crossed the thin line of light under her door, then faded away. She waited until the sound vanished completely before exhaling. When she finally stepped into the hallway, it was empty. Only the storm outside broke the silence. Downstairs, Adrian was in his study. His desk was covered with open folders, old foundation ledgers, and files marked confidential. His tie was loosened, his eyes sharp from hours of reading. When Lila entered, he looked up with a tired half-smile. You should not be awake, he said. I could say the same for you, she replied. He leaned back in his chair. I have been going through the Foundation's records. There are transactions I never approved, large donations that vanished overnight. Every file that connects to those payments lists Victor as the primary contact. Lila's pulse quickened. He is covering his tracks. He deleted the folder with my name as soon as we saw it. Adrian nodded slowly. He is not just covering tracks. He is creating new ones. And you are the easiest scapegoat. She felt the truth of his words settle heavily in her chest. Then we need proof that cannot disappear. Adrian glanced toward his fountain pen lying beside the files. Every signature in this house mine, yours, even Mrs. Crowell's, is logged digitally through the security hub. If we can access the local server, we might trace when and how the forgery was uploaded. Lila took a cautious step forward. Do you still have the access code? He hesitated. Yes, but the room is restricted. Victor ordered maintenance on it last week. I think he changed the main password. Then there must be a backup, she said, thinking aloud. Mrs. Crowell keeps a master key for emergencies. Adrian's eyes lifted to hers. Would she trust you enough to give it? I do not know, Lila answered. But she trusts the truth. The plan formed quietly between them. Lila would ask the housekeeper for access under the pretense of repairing the network for Adrian's health monitors. Meanwhile, Adrian would reach out to an old attorney, a man named Mendez who once managed his late wife's charity division. At 2 a.m, Lila found Mrs. Crowell in the kitchen, making tea for herself. The older woman studied her with the same unreadable calm she always had. Could I have the key to the security hub? Lila asked, forcing her tone to stay casual. The system keeps losing connection. Mr. Hale's medical monitor went offline earlier, and he is anxious. Mrs. Crowell paused, her hand hovering over the kettle. You think the problem is in the hub? Yes, ma'am. I can run a reset manually. Local. The woman considered her for a long moment. You are either very brave or very foolish, Miss Monroe, but I believe you are not lying. She opened a small drawer, pulled out a brass key, and handed it over. Be quick. Lila thanked her, heart pounding, and made her way down the narrow hallway to the basement. The door to the security hub creaked when she turned the key. Inside, the hum of machines filled the dark room. She found the main terminal, typed in the sequence Adrian had given her, and waited. Lines of code appeared, scrolling like rain. Then she saw an automated schedule, programmed to disable the cameras every night at exactly 11:57. The source, user V. Armitage. Lila printed the log, slipped it into her notebook, and turned to leave. But the moment she stepped into the hallway, she froze. Victor stood at the end of the corridor, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. Working late, Miss Monroe? He asked, voice smooth as glass. Her fingers tightened around the notebook. The system needed a reset. He smiled faintly. Of course it did. You seem to find your way into every corner of this house. The air between them grew cold. Victor took a slow step closer. Be careful where curiosity takes you. Sometimes people who dig too deep end up buried. RT. He walked past her, the scent of his expensive cologne trailing behind, leaving the warning hanging in the air. Lila waited until he disappeared, then hurried upstairs. Her pulse was steady, her mind clear. She had what she needed, proof that could not vanish. For the first time in weeks, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt resolve. The morning came gray and cold, the kind of light that made the ocean look like steel. Hale Manor was quiet, but not peaceful. Every clock ticked too loudly. Every sound felt like a warning. Lila walked through the hall carrying her notebook close to her chest. Inside, it was the printed log from the security hub, proof that Victor Armitage had been tampering with the cameras. When she entered the study, Adrian was already there, standing by the window in his usual silence. He turned as she closed the door behind her. I found the schedule, she said. The system was programmed to shut down the cameras at 11:57 every night. The user was Victor. Adrian's jaw tightened. He must have used the blackout to move the files. My wife's foundation was his path to power. He probably sold information to competitors. Lila placed the printed log on the desk. We can prove it. I copied everything. He looked down at the papers, then back at her. You should not have gone there alone. She smiled faintly. Neither should you be fighting this alone. For a brief moment, their eyes met in quiet understanding. Then his phone vibrated on the desk, and the fragile calm broke. A new headline flashed across the screen. CEO Adrian Hale to sell Hale Foundation assets today. The article included a photograph of Adrian at a gala from months earlier and a line of text beneath it. authorized by House Assistant Lila Monroe. He stared at the screen in disbelief. They released it. They used your name again. Lila's face went pale. But the log shows it is fake. We can prove it. Adrian sank into his chair, running a hand through his hair. The public will not wait for proof. They will believe what they see. Before she could speak, Mrs. Crowell appeared in the doorway. Her face was grim. There are reporters at the gate. They want a statement. Victor is outside, speaking to them now. Adrian rose immediately, fury replacing fatigue. He is what? Do not go out there, Mrs. Crowell warned, but he was already striding past her. Lila followed, her heart pounding as they stepped out into the courtyard. Cameras flashed in the gray light. Reporters shouted questions. And there, at the center of the chaos, stood Victor Armitage Muth, composed, playing the part of the loyal executive betrayed by his employer. Mr. Pete Hale, Victor called out, loud enough for the cameras to catch every word. Perhaps your maid can explain why her name is on the authorization forms. Maybe she convinced you to trust her a little too much. A ripple of laughter and whispers spread through the crowd. Adrian stopped, his fists clenched. You are a liar. Victor smiled thinly. Then show them the truth. For a moment, Adrian's eyes flickered toward Lila. She could see the pain there, not anger at her, but confusion and exhaustion. This was the moment Victor wanted. Doubt, in front of witnesses. Lila stepped forward before she could lose her nerve. You want truth? She said, her voice steady though her hands trembled. Then listen. Mr. Hale did not sign anything. The files were created during camera blackouts that you scheduled. I have the logs to prove it. Victor's calm expression wavered. Logs can be faked. A maid has no authority in corporate matters. Maybe not, she replied, but the truth does. Adrian's voice cut through the noise. Enough. He turned to the reporters. You will hear the real story soon. Until then, this interview is over. He led Lila back inside, shutting the heavy doors behind them. The echo of the click felt final. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the storm outside had been replaced by the muffled hum of the crowd beyond the gates. Finally, Adrian said quietly, I know you are telling the truth, but they have turned everything against you, against both of us. I do not care what they say, Lila answered. I care that you believe me. He met her gaze. I do. She hesitated, then placed the notebook on his desk. There is another copy of the evidence stored in the backup drive. If anything happens to me, call Attorney Mendez. He handled your wife's foundation before Victor took over. Duh. Adrian's expression softened with a mix of gratitude and guilt. You should not have to risk yourself for this. She shook her head. I am not risking myself. I am keeping a promise to my mother, and now to you. Outside, the voices of the reporters faded as the rain began again. It fell harder this time, drumming against the roof in a rhythm that matched the beating of her heart. Lila turned toward the window, watching the gray sky blur into silver streaks. Something inside her knew this storm was not the end, but the beginning of the fight that would decide everything. The rain did not stop for 2 days. It fell over Hale Manor in steady sheets, washing the world into shades of gray. Inside the house, silence grew heavier with each passing hour. The reporters were gone now, but the damage was done. Every newspaper headline carried the same story. CEO betrayed by Maid. Argonne. Lila kept to herself, cleaning the rooms in silence, avoiding the places where memories pressed too close. The notebook never left her pocket. She had copied the camera logs, the backup drive, even the printed reports. They were all locked in a small tin box beneath her bed. She had done everything right, yet she was the one being watched. That evening, Mrs. Crowell found her in the kitchen. The older woman poured tea without a word, then finally said, Mr. Hale has not eaten all day. Arta. Lila hesitated. He will not want to see me. Mrs. Crowell looked up, her voice firm. Then go anyway. He needs someone to remind him that he is not alone. When Lila entered the study, Adrian was sitting in the dark, the only light coming from the fireplace. Papers covered his desk, half of them unread. He did not turn when she stepped inside. You should not be here, he said quietly. Neither should you, she answered. You have not slept in 2 nights. Tama. He laughed softly, a sound without humor. Sleep is a luxury for men whose names are not on every screen in the city. Lila walked closer, setting a cup of tea beside him. Then stop fighting alone. Let someone help you. He turned finally, his eyes tired but sharp. Why are you still here? After everything they said about you, most people would have run. She met his gaze without flinching. Because I know what it feels like to be accused of something you did not do. Because you need someone to remember who you really are. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Adrian reached for the pen on the table, the same silver fountain pen he had given her weeks ago. He held it up between them. This pen is how they forged your name. They copied the signature you wrote for me that night. The tremor in my hand left a digital trace on the pad. That is how they created the authorization. Lila frowned. Can you prove it? Maybe, he said. If I can access the biometric data stored in the system. Each stroke pattern is unique. If I can compare mine to the forged one, the difference will be clear. She nodded slowly. Then we have to retrieve it. Adrian leaned back in his chair. The files are on the internal server, but Victor has already changed the access codes. We cannot do this alone. Attorney Mendez, Lila said immediately. You trusted him once. He can help us again. Ardent. Adrian looked toward the rain-blurred window, as if weighing his past against his pride. Mendez left years ago when the board pushed my wife's charity into the foundation. He warned me not to mix business with compassion. Then prove him wrong, Lila said softly. Prove that compassion is what saves it. Her words settled between them, quiet but firm. He took out his phone and began typing. I will call him. Tomorrow morning. Lila exhaled, relief flickering across her face. Good. That gives us tonight to prepare. She walked to the bookshelf, where a row of old photo albums gathered dust. She opened one without thinking and froze. Inside was a picture of Adrian and his wife standing in front of a banner that read Hale Foundation. Hope through healing. The woman's smile was radiant, her eyes bright with purpose. She believed this place could heal people, Lila said softly. Maybe it still can. Adrian's gaze softened as he looked at the photo. She believed in goodness, even when the world gave her every reason not to. Lila closed the album gently and turned back to him. Then, let us finish what she started. Outside, lightning flashed over the sea, and the thunder rolled across the cliffs like a promise. Adrian stood, the determination in his eyes returning for the first time in weeks. You are right, he said. Tomorrow we fight back. Lila nodded. And tonight you rest. Even warriors need sleep. He smiled faintly. You sound like my wife. Then she must have been very smart, Lila replied. He looked at her for a long moment before saying, She was, and I think she would have liked you. The fire crackled softly as Lila left the room, her heart heavy but steady. Upstairs, she locked her door, checked the tin box under her bed, and whispered to herself, One more day. Tine. Outside, the rain slowed, and for the first time in a long while, the house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the storm that would either destroy them or set them free. The afternoon sky hung low and heavy over the city. Inside the glass tower of the Hale Foundation, the boardroom filled with quiet tension. Every seat was taken. Reporters waited in the hallway, cameras ready. It was the emergency hearing that would decide the future of Adrian Hale, his company, and the truth behind the forged sale. Adrian sat at the head of the long oak table. To his right sat Attorney Mendez, calm and focused. To his left sat Lila Monroe, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her notebook resting beside her. Across from them was Victor Armitage, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his expression a mask of false confidence. The chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Hale, you are accused of authorizing the liquidation of your foundation's assets through internal staff misuse. The evidence appears to involve your assistant, Miss Monroe. Do you have a statement before we proceed? Adrian's voice was steady. Yes, I have a statement and proof. He nodded to Mendez, who opened a folder and began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, what you have heard is a fabrication. The real source of this crisis lies within the system logs of Hale Manor's smart home security. We have recovered the data. The lights dimmed slightly as Mendez projected the first file onto the screen. A digital timeline appeared, lines of code and timestamps marking each night the cameras had gone offline. This schedule, Mendez continued, was not created by Miss Monroe. It was entered using the administrator account belonging to Chief Financial Officer Victor Armitage. Co? A murmur rippled through the room. Victor leaned forward, his voice sharp. Anyone could have accessed that account. Mendez raised a hand. Perhaps, but the system records IP addresses. Here is yours. Another file appeared, showing Victor's login history. Each entry matched the nights Lila had recorded the outages. Adrian spoke next. and here is the rest." He held up a printed report comparing two signatures, the real one he had written that morning and the forged one used for the sale. Side by side, the difference was clear. The forgery was too smooth, without the slight tremor that came from his old hand injury. The falsified signature was created using digital overlays from an earlier sample, Mendez explained. We traced the upload path back to Victor's office terminal. Victor's composure began to crack. "You cannot prove that," he snapped. Lila finally spoke. Her voice was calm but strong. "Yes, we can. Every night I wrote down the times the system failed. Those notes match this data exactly. I did not forge anything. I was only doing my job." The chairman leaned back, studying her. "And you risked your position to bring this forward?" "Yes," she said simply, "because what we protect says more about us than what we own." For a moment the room was silent except for the hum of the projector. Then one of the board members whispered, "Check the financial transfers." Lol. Another report appeared on the screen, records of payments from the foundation account to a public relations firm under Ria Miles's name, a known associate of Victor. Mendez closed his folder. The evidence speaks for itself. Fraud, forgery, and manipulation of internal systems. I recommend immediate termination and legal proceedings against Victor Armitage and Ria Miles. The chairman nodded slowly. Agreed. Security entered the room. Victor rose abruptly, his face pale but defiant. "You will regret this," he said to Adrian before the guards escorted him out. Adrian's reply was quiet. "No, Victor. The only thing I regret is trusting the wrong kind of loyalty." When the doors closed behind him, the silence that followed felt heavier than the storm clouds outside. Mendez turned to Adrian and Lila. "It is over. You both did what few people have the courage to do, stand up for the truth." Lila let out a long, trembling breath. For the first time in weeks, the air around her felt lighter. Outside, sunlight began to break through the clouds, spilling across the skyline. The storm was finally ending. Spring returned quietly to the Massachusetts coast. The waves had softened, the sky had turned a deeper blue, and the air around Hale Manor no longer felt heavy with secrets. The past weeks had changed everything. Adrian Hale had regained his company, his name, and his peace. Victor and Ria were under investigation, and the Hale Foundation had been restored to its original purpose, healing lives, not exploiting them. That morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the restored rooftop garden. Rows of lavender and mint swayed gently in the ocean wind. The place smelled clean, like new beginnings. Adrian stood near the railing, watching the horizon. He wore a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up, no longer the distant man imprisoned by insomnia. Footsteps approached behind him. "You still prefer tea over coffee," Lila said, setting a tray on the stone ledge beside him. He turned, smiling. "Some habits are worth keeping." Lila laughed softly. "You sound almost normal now." "I feel normal," he said, for the first time in years. She looked around the rooftop, the sunlight glinting against the newly installed glass panels. "You brought the garden back." "It was my wife's idea," he replied. "She wanted a place that reminded people of calm, not power." He reached into his pocket and held out a small box. Inside was the cracked ceramic mug, repaired with fine gold lines through the breaks. The mended edges caught the light beautifully. "You kept it," Lila whispered. "I fixed it," Adrian said. "Kintsugi, the art of making broken things stronger. It reminded me of you." Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing. He placed the mug into her hands. "You helped me heal, Lila. You reminded me that people matter more than perfection. I would like you to stay with the foundation, and with me." Lila blinked, unsure how to respond. "In what way?" He smiled gently. "As Director of Well-Being and Community, it is a new position. You already earned it. And if someday you choose more than that, my answer will still be yes." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sea wind lifted her hair, the lavender rustled softly, and somewhere below, the bells of a small church chimed the hour. Lila placed the mug on the ledge and met his gaze. "I do not need to think about it. I am staying." Adrian's expression softened, then welcome home. They stood together in silence, looking out toward the ocean. The light shifted across the waves, scattering silver and blue in endless motion. In the distance, a group of volunteers was setting up for the first event of the revived Hale Foundation One Kindness Day. It was a day to honor small acts that changed lives, born from a maid's compassion and a man's rediscovery of it. As the breeze swept through the garden, Lila took a deep breath and whispered the words that had once calmed him through sleepless nights. Inhale 4, hold 7, exhale 8. Adrian closed his eyes and followed her rhythm. For the first time, his breathing was steady not because someone guided him, but because he had finally learned to find peace on his own. The camera of time would have closed there, two people standing in sunlight, a mended cup between them, and the quiet truth that healing is not the end of the story. It is where the real one begins.